Om. Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo Maheshwaraha, Gurureva Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Chinmayam Vyapyat Sarvam Trailokyam Sacharacharam Tatpadam Darshitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Tvameva Mata cha Pita Tvameva Bandhuscha Sakha Tvameva Vedya Dravinam Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva. Jai Guru. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Marupena Sanstitaha Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Shakti Rupena Sanstitaha Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Buddhi Rupena Sanstitaha Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Lakshmi Rupena Sanstitaha Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha. So we are in the 4th chapter, if I'm correct. Is that right?
Yes.
We're starting on 15.
Yes,
please.
and the subject under discussion is Hemaleka and Hemachuta are discussing what is happiness, what is pleasure. And it started off with this very funny section where he jumps her bones and is all hot and bothered to do the mufti pufti with her, and she seems distracted. And he says, it can't be fun for me if you don't get all hot and bothered too. You seem distracted. What's going on? And she says, well, my lord, I'm just a foolish woman, but I'm always trying to figure out where happiness is. You're a man. You can instruct me on this. And he says, foolish women, they just don't understand things. It's very simple. Basically, when you get what you want, you're happy. And when you don't get what you want, you're not happy. Even animals understand that. And she goes, but is that so? And she introduces the ideas of impermanence. And what yoga says is, sukham dukham cha, happiness and suffering are the same thing. They are two sides of the same thing. That if I invest my happiness in some person, place, thing, or situation, I will suffer because of its impermanence. It's going to pass. Or my mind will change and I won't want it anymore. Or I had an expectation it was going to make me happy, then when I got it, really didn't do the trick. And then the worst part of it, if by some chance I work really hard and I get it and it's momentarily made me happy, it leaves an impression in the unconscious of vasana, which then compels me to want to repeat that act. I'm going to introduce to you the ruthless rule of the mind. The ruthless rule of the mind is the mind pursues the experience that's given it the greatest juice, the greatest joy, the greatest good. It will pursue that even if the end result is misery. Will go down the rabbit hole of addiction and obsession to try to recreate those peak moments of euphoria. Now, thank God, God is the most beloved, or we'd all be screwed. So what we're doing as yogis is we're going to finally give the mind something that truly satisfies. It is the Lord that satisfies the hungry heart. Or as the Hebrew psalmist says, taste and see the goodness of the Lord. My favorite psalms. Okay, does anyone remember what shloka we're on?
We should start 15.
15? Let me quickly review the pleasure principle, I call it. I have recently found out that's a term that some philosophers and psychologists use, so I'm going to have to come up with a different name. But this is the dynamic that yoga puts forward. I literally create, because of the force of my past, what I think will make me happy. We'll use the prayer stone as a stand-in for whatever it is, the widget. So that first condition we call priya. It is dear to me. Then what do? I engage in kartavya, the obligatory struggle to try to acquire the widget. I buy it, I create it, I steal it, I marry it, whatever I'm going to do. And when I get proximate to the object of desire, moda, then finally, when desire and object of desire become one, oh yeah, pramoda. In my ignorance, I think the sukham, the happiness, is in the object. Actually, what's happened is it's the longing itself that is my dukkha, my suffering. And at that point of pleasure, for a moment, the mind has been freed from its longing. The mind has come home. It has ceased what we call the vikshepa shakti. Comes right home. That feels good. But in my delusion, I think the only way to get there is through the external objects. This is why meditation is so important, because meditation will give us the direct experience of a non-mediated, an immediated yoga union. The mind yoked to its source. The mind comes home, in a sense, it's no mind. We call the self Ananda, bliss absolute, because when the mind comes home, it is blissful. And I think I gave the assignment, watch your mind. Make friends with your suffering. When the mind is caught up in its vikshepa shakti, mudha, fool, there I am, wanting. It's so painful and so repetitive and so mechanical. And then make friends with your bliss. If you satisfy a desire, and it's really intense, notice what happens to your mind. That's a taste of your self-nature. You mean an ice cream cone, good music, good sex, accomplishing something at work, all does the same thing to my mind? Yes. It varies in intensity and duration, depending on how badly I wanted it and how completely it fulfilled the desire. We won't go into it tonight, but there's also a hierarchy of intensity depending on how gross or subtle the object is. But we get fooled by the diversity of sensory experience. So you've got to be very attentive to watch what happens, to make friends with your pleasure, with your happiness, to own the bliss. So the fool dances with the object. And when desire and object of desire become one, the end insight, the knowledge is, oh, that was a great widget. I need more widgets. The yogi dancing with an object. The desire rises in his or her bosom. Oh, look at that. Force of the past maturing. It's really unimportant in the end. Am I going to act on it? Well, is there a widget around? Maybe. Okay, there's a widget. Desire and object of desire become one. Wow, that stopped my mind. Krishna. 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 Then the objects cannot bind us. We have mediated experiences of the bliss of the self through the objects. We're always living. And we have a non-mediated experience of the bliss of the self when I let go of the world. All right, let's go on with the verses.
Verse 15. Shita prakriti jivanam प्रियोऽन्येषां तथेतरः अथाप्यधिकभावेन अल्पभावेनैव मीरितः. For living beings whose natural disposition is cold, it is pleasant, and for others it is unpleasant. Likewise, it is thus declared by its existence in greater or smaller measure.
So here she is talking about various conditions. So fire, etc., the moon, etc. For one kind of person, it's pleasant. For another, it is unpleasant. What she's driving at is, what is it that has ananda as its dharma, that has sukham as its dharma? Here we're defining dharma as the nature of a thing, the essence of a thing without which it would not be the thing that it is. Everybody experiences heat and fire. Everybody experiences sweetness and sugar. Everybody experiences wetness and water. But not everybody gets happiness from the same objects. They're diverse, and the experiences are diverse from people to people. What is it that has sukham, sweetness, happiness, pleasure, ananda, bliss, as its essence? Let's find out. 14. Going on, Puneet.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Evam shitam dhanam dara putra rajyam tathetarata athapyevam maharajo daraputra dhanevritah. Thus are coldness, wealth, wife, sons, kingdom, and the rest. So also is the king Muktachuda surrounded by wife, sons, and wealth in this manner.
So, the pleasure that the beggar experiences because of sons, wives, etc., and the pleasure that the king experiences, are they any different? Do ugly people enjoy sex? Yes. Do poor people enjoy good company? Yes. So all the things that we think beauty and riches and power bestow, are they exclusive to that class of person? Going on.
Shochat yunidam kasmana shochanan titare kutah yoyam bhoga sukhartesti sonpyananto bhavenunu. For what reason does he grieve every day, and why others, not having much enjoyment, do not grieve? This enjoyment, which is for the sake of pleasure, even that cannot possibly be endless.
So even if you're a king with a lot of wealth, if you are not getting what you want, if you still have what in this scripture we're calling kartavya, this compulsion to struggle, you're not a happy person. Likewise, the ascetic living in the forest with nothing, if they are content, they have peace of mind. Now listen carefully. The presence or absence of wealth or possessions has nothing to do with happiness beyond a certain point. No one thinks about money more, for example, than the very poor. To a starving person, God is bread. But once our basic survival needs are taken care of, all the rest of that stuff has to do with how needy we are, what we think we need in order to be happy. Many yogis choose to live with a simple life that's different than an impoverished life. There is a difference. But what makes a person happy is if they're content. Santosha. Going on.
न केनचित् दखिलं प्राप्तं यस्मात् सुखं भवेत् यत्केचन लभतो यत् सुखं तत्रापि शृणु. That enjoyment has not been obtained by anybody entirely. That enjoyment has not been obtained by anybody entirely by which there can be happiness. Even in that case, where there may be happiness on account of the acquisition of whatever little enjoyment there is, hear the facts.
So here she's saying nobody out there in the world is what we call a bhogi, who's practicing bhoga, enjoyment, ever attains freedom from this kartavya, this struggle. I'll be happy when, it'll be better if. No matter what level they're desiring. I can remember a conversation I had with a fellow. He was concerned about his job because he'd gotten a job with this company. He's a microbiologist. And they were making a drug called, I think it's called Kratom. It's quasi-legal, but it was a pretty hinky outfit. I mean, there are a lot of people were, doing cocaine, and they were sleazy. And he's an ethical man. And he was saying, Jim, I just want to stay until I'm financially secure, And I said to him, I won't mention his name, dude, you already own 5 houses in California. More zeros will not make you secure. Listen very carefully. More zeros in your paycheck will not free you from fear, which is the real problem. The fear of financial insecurity. If you have the fear of financial insecurity, no amount of money will cure it. Antithetically, if you trust God, if you've deeply internalized that it's a beneficent universe that conspires for your well-being if you let it, that it's all going to work out, it's all going to be okay, even dying is going to be okay. And you're free from fear. The presence or absence of possessions or money or bank accounts is not a big deal. It's not a big deal. So we need to deal with the fear first. And that's another one of society's great lies. More money's going to make me more secure, more free from fear. Doesn't work. So now she's going to explain, she's going to summarize these principles for him. Next verse.
I have a question, Jim, if I may.
Please.
You mentioned that if you have an inherent faith in a beneficial or a beneficent universe, right? I just want to.
I use the word beneficent, but yes, a positive. It's a loving and good place.
Right. So I know there is no contradiction here, but I still would like to hear your opinion or view on the terrible aspect of the mother, because that makes it sound sometimes like it's not all beneficent.
This terrible aspect of what?
Of the Divine Mother.
Oh, okay. Well, what she does with us, the terrible aspect of it, she does love us, even though she's terrible. But let me give you an example. Many of you know I'm an alcoholic. And good Lord willing, this February, I'll have 35 years clean and sober. I was very lucky. I did not drink and use for very long. But the suffering was pretty intense. That was the Divine Mother. So I got a big slap from her saying, no, Jim, you cannot live this way. You can't even touch a drop of it. Now, it was one of the things, and many others, that's led me into living now a pretty sattvic life. Not out of any virtue. I mean, the latest way that the terrible hand of the mother has done, I'm now diabetic, for God's sake. I've been a pig. September of last year, I was 247 pounds. And then she says, oh, you can keep eating, but don't be surprised if I cut your feet off in 5 years.
Got it.
So she's always there in her terrible aspect, willing to hand us suffering. But what's the purpose of it? It is theoretically possible to make progress spiritually out of inspiration. After a while, we begin to go there. But for most of us, especially in the beginning, it's a response to our suffering. Our suffering is a great teacher. So if you look at the iconography around her, you look at Kali Ma with her skulls and, all that stuff, all those are the various things that we have to look at, that she presents to us. Those things we're afraid of, and we need to make peace with. But the truth is, she's a loving mother. Now, today, I'm still very active in Alcoholics Anonymous. I do a lot of service there. One of the things you hear over and over again, someone who's, you ask them, well, do you believe in heaven and hell? And they'll say, well, I'm not so sure about heaven, but I know that hell exists because I've been able to get out of it. And they'll say, I'm a grateful alcoholic because it drove me into the spiritual life. That's a classic example of the mother and her terrible aspect. Is that useful?
Very useful, Jim. Thanks a lot.
All right, any other questions about this? Just because it's beneficent doesn't mean we like it, by the way. And it doesn't mean that it's not on occasion painful. But we need to also understand that the vast majority of my suffering, my pain, is because of my attachment, my unwillingness to let go and to accept what is. All right, next verse.
न तत् सुखं भवेनाथ यतो दुःख विमिश्रितं दुःखं तु द्विविधं प्रोक्तं बाह्यमान्तरमित्यपि. Lord, that cannot be happiness since it is mixed with sorrow. Sorrow is said to be of two kinds, external and internal.
So now she's talking about we can't say that it's real happiness if it's mixed with sorrow. Again, one of my favorite images of Shankara, he says, are you like a person at a banquet with a thorn in his throat? It could be a great feast, but if there's sorrow, if you've got the thorn in your throat, you can't enjoy it. You may be on the beach at Mykonos in Greece, but if you've got a terrible sunburn, you can't enjoy it. Going on.
Bahyam sharira sambhutam dhratidoshadi sambhavam antaram manasam proktam tacca vachasu mudbhavam. The external one is produced by the body and arises out of defects in the humors or essential ingredients of the body, and the like. The internal one is said to be mental, and that desire has as its origin.
So the external pain, suffering, is when I'm sick, is basically what she's saying. When, according to Ayurveda medicine, the humors of the body are out of balance. Few people jump off the bridge, try to kill themselves, get arrested because of physical illness. The second kind of suffering is mental, and it has desire or craving or longing, spriha, thirsting Krishna, as its origin. What's the word she used here? I wasn't quite paying attention to the Sanskrit. Does she use kama?
For desire?
Yeah.
Vanchas, I think.
I don't know that word. Okay. Spell it.
I think it's VANCHA.
Yeah, never mind. I'll talk with you later about it. I might be learning a new word. Next verse.
Mahataram manasam syat. Mahataram manasam syat yena kastamidam jagat vanchaiva dukkhavittapi bijam sudrishaktikam. Mental pain by which this world is seized can be greater than physical pain. Desire alone is the seed of the tree of sorrow having great power.
So here she says, as I have said before, physical pain, being sick, it's bad. But that's not what drives most of us. It's the craving. It's the yearning. It's the wanting. I want, I want, I want. I'll be happy when, it'll be better if, more, better, different. Only takes two forms. I either need to fix or change the world, or I need to fix or change me. That is it. Yoga says there is no other suffering than wanting something you don't have, or its inverse, wanting to be rid of something I don't like, Vesha. There's an erotic form. I have what I want, and I'm afraid I'm going to lose it. Next verse.
Yaya kinka rata prapta kurvantyeva divanisham indrada yopi vibhudah swar nivasa sadoditaha. By that desire, even gods like Indra, who are residents of heaven and ever existing, have attained to the state of servants and surely do work day and night.
Yes. So even the gods of our mythology, in the stories where they are under the throes of longing, are caught up in the compulsion to act, frequently foolishly. But you and I, what we mean by Indra here, is even when we're a powerful person, we still are under the throes of craving, longing, the pain of it, the suffering. Going on.
Sukham vanchhavasheshepi yadasti nripasambhava tad dukkha meva janihi yat krimish vapi sambhavet. Prince, the happiness which exists even when there is a remainder of desire, know that as sorrow alone, that can arise even in worms. Note, such happiness such happiness being mixed with sorrow is trivial and obtains even in worms.
Yes. So here she's saying it cannot be a perfect happiness if in the midst of it I still have desire. I still have desire. And one of the things that's most devastating to a successful person who lives a life of boga is when you get what you want and you realize I'm still restless, irritable, and discontent. It didn't satisfy me. As long as I haven't gotten what I wanted, I can labor under the illusion. Oh, that's going to make me happy. That's going to make me happy. Then you get it. And I'm still a desire of desires. I don't even know what I want, but I want. Uncomfortable, meaning the mind is under vasana pressure. Next one.
Varam tirya kakit krimi prabrittinam sukham tu yat swalpa vanchasya millitam nrinakim syat sukham vada. But the happiness of animals, insects, and worms, which is mixed with very little desire, is better. Say, what happiness can there be for men?
So the happiness of lower orders, she says, is better because they don't long for much. It's interesting. I was walking down the sidewalk the other day, and there was a dog on a leash chained to a parking meter while its parents were inside the restaurant eating. It had a collar around its neck, a chain to a parking meter, and it seemed to be very content to just lie there on the sidewalk. Didn't seem to be looking around a lot. Didn't seem to be unhappy. It wasn't whining or anything like that. It was totally content to be in the now. How many of us could be so content? Next one.
Vancha shatasamavisto yadi kinchid upetyatu sukhi bhavediha tada kohina syat sukhi vada. If one who is overcome by 100 desires could be happy here after having obtained a little, then say who indeed cannot be happy.
So if I have 1,000,000 desires or 100 desires and I get one of them satisfied, would that do the trick? But that's not the case. I satisfy one desire and I've got 99 more still lurking. And if I really intensely satisfy that one desire, guess what's going to happen? I'm going to want to repeat it. One chocolate is fabulous, but then I want more. Next one.
Akhilange vahina digdagde Sukshmapati rabinduna yadi shitala deha syat tada sophi sukhi bhavet. Even he, the one endowed with 100 desires, can be happy if there can be a cool body by the application of a little drop of sandal in one burnt by fire in his entire body.
So if you've got an intense suffering and that one gets satisfied, you can have happiness for a moment, even if you've got 100 others. Very weird. Going on.
Priyaya samparishvangat sukham prapnoti vairnaraha tatraivangasya vishama bandhanat dukkham bhavenanu. Man indeed obtains pleasure from the close embrace of his beloved. On that occasion itself, there can indeed be pain on the account of the rough holding or even or uneven posture of the body.
honey, stop. My arm is underneath. It hurts. No, you're biting. It hurts. We're so funny. In the midst of intense pleasure, even then, suffering. Going on.
Ratyaveshat parishranti sarvesham jayate kila anantaram bharava pasha ireva parishramaha. Fatigue is certainly produced for everybody after the flurry or passion of copulation, as there is fatigue for an animal carrying a load.
Oh my. So, one rolls over and is exhausted from the intense work of copulation. Is that any different than when you take the huge load off the back of the donkey or the camel? I'm carrying the burden of horniness. And this relieves the burden. So I roll over, exhausted. Rather graphic. Going on.
Katham pashyasi tat saukyam nathaitanme samucyatam yavat sukham kriya sange nadi sangha drisambhavam tavasti tavanam kimu shanumastiha tadvada. Lord, how do you see that as happiness? Let this be declared to me. As much as there is pleasure for you in the union with the beloved arising from the friction in the nadis, nerves, arteries, or veins, is there not so much here for dogs having a similar union? Tell me that.
So is this such a great pleasure when you're making love with your beloved? Is it any greater pleasure than what a dog experiences? Just friction, just rubbing. All the romance novels, it's all about just rubbing. Going on.
Yattato hyatiriktam te drishta saundarya sambhavam tat kevala bhimanothatam swapna stri sangame yatha. If what is greater than that pleasure mentioned above is the one arising from the beauty of the beloved seen or enjoyed by you, then that is produced from mere conceit or fanciful notion, as it is in the union with a woman in a dream.
Yes. So if you say, no, it's pleasurable because I love her, it's because I see her and I love her. If that's where the pleasure comes, is it any different than imagination? Someone seen in a dream. Where is the pleasure? Desire, object of desire, priya, moda, pramoda. In truth, it's just a taste of my own self-nature. Going on.
Pura kinchid raj jasuto manmathadhika sundaraha kanchit surupini praptaha striyam sarva manoharam atyanta anuraktaha sa tasya rajakumarakaha. Formerly, a certain prince, more beautiful than the god of love, obtained as his wife a certain lovely woman who fascinated everyone. That prince was extremely attached to her.
Oh, this is a funny story. So there's this stud of a prince, and he's really a hottie. He gets this beautiful wife. Let's see what happens.
Sa tvanya asmin rajasa tabritye sansaka manasa sabrityo rajaputram ta vanchayamasa yuktitaha. But her mind was attached to another person, the servant of the prince. That servant cheated that prince through a scheme.
So she is hot for the servant. You gotta see him. He's, bad boy. These gals out there, they see somebody who's, good looking and he comes from a good family and he makes a good income and he's kind and generous. I want a bad boy. Someone who rides motorcycles, has tattoos. So that's the kind of girl she is. So she's got the hots for this servant. So let's look at the ruse that she puts together.
Ram Mohanarthaya Tasmai Dattva Matrakam Tato Madan Dhaya Chetim Kanchit Preshya Kurupinim Bhuje Tam Tasya Patnim Sarvalokai Kasundarim, giving him spirituous liquor excessively for stupefying him, and then sending a certain ugly maid to the prince, who was blinded by intoxication. He enjoyed that prince's wife, who was the most beautiful in the entire world.
So she gets him drunk. She asks one of the maids, who's very plain, to take to go into him after he's drunk. And he's so drunk that he doesn't realize that it's not his wife. And it's very interesting. You gals may not know this about men, but when men are aroused, all the blood drains from their brains and it goes to their private parts. And they're absolutely incapable of thought or discrimination. You may have noticed that about men. It's a dosha, it's a defect. Some people call it testosterone poisoning, but it happens. So he's all hot to trot, doesn't even realize that it's not his wife, and enjoys her immensely. Going on.
Evameva chiram tatra madandho nripate sutah pratyaham chetikam gachan vatmanam samamam satam dhanyo hami drishi loka sundari prana preyasim upagachamyaham nityam namesti sadrisha kvachit. Quite so. The king's son, blinded by intoxication for a very long time there, and copulating with the maid every day, valued himself highly. I am fortunate. I approach every day such a beautiful woman who is my lover as dear as life. There is none like me anywhere.
So, not realizing that he's been doing the mufti pufti with the ugly maid, he thinks he's such a virtuous man, such a lucky man, because his wife is so gorgeous. And he gets to make love with her every night after getting totally drunk. Going on.
Evam vritte chire kale kadachit daiva yogatah भृत्यो निधाय पानं स कार्ये चात्यन्तिके ययौ अथ राजकुमारस्त पानं नात्यतिकं पपौ. When a long time passed in this manner, at one time that servant, accidentally putting the drink down, went away on excessive work. Then the prince did not drink that liquor too much.
So there's a mess up in the plot. This night, the maid doesn't make sure that the prince gets drunk. So for once, he doesn't get smashed. Now, this next part is really funny. So, gals, Men are really like this. Go ahead. Next verse.
Nimitto yayau shrigram ratyo sukta suktim manasaha shayaniyam manakantam sarvabhogar this sanyutum Griham devapatir iva nandana sansthitam. For some apparent reason, he went away quickly with a mind restless for enjoyment to his pleasant bed chamber endowed with excellent objects of enjoyment, as the chief of the gods Indra goes to the residence of his consort Sachi situated in his garden.
So even though he's not loaded, that he's not drunk, he's all ready for amorous pleasure. So he goes into the beautifully appointed bedchamber. Let's see what happens.
Paradhya paryakangatam tam chetim upasangataha kamavegena vivasho bhujjet atyanta arshataha. He approached that maid resting on the finest bed and having lost control over himself due to the agitation caused by lust, enjoyed her with the greatest delight.
So even though he's not drunk, he sees a woman in his bed, assumes it's his wife, and he hops to it and enjoys her completely until he's finished. Now, mind you, this happens after he's finished. Let's see what happens. It's very funny.
Upalabhyataratyante chetim tam vivikratkritaim shankito maharshachapi kimeta ditirchintayan kwasa mama priyatam yeva tamvan na apricchata. Then, at the end of enjoyment, finding out as the maid with a loathsome appearance and thinking, "What is this?" he became suspicious and angry. He questioned her thus, "Where is she, my most beloved wife?"
So he doesn't realize that it's the ugly maid until after he's finished making love. Then he realizes, wait a minute, you're not my wife. What the heck is going on here? Going on.
Prishtaivam tena sacheti vimadam tam nishamyatu bhita na kinchitam praha vepamana tadatataha. That maid, questioned by him thus, and having observed him as free from intoxication, did not say anything to him then, frightened and trembling thereupon.
So she's scared. So she's just afraid he's going to hit her or cut her throat or whatever. She's just trembling there in the bed. Now let's see what happens. Going on.
Alakya Rajaputropi Veshamya Chatmavancanam Vamena Jagraha Kache Chetim Krodharurena Shanaha Kripanim Adade Daksha Hastena Nripasambhavaha Tarjayan Sastam Pratyuvach Vadavrittam Yathatatham No chaina syat jivitam te shana matramapi drutam. The prince, with his eyes red with anger, discerning the injustice and the trick played on him, caught hold of the maid by her hair with the left hand and took hold of his sword with the right hand. The prince spoke to her, threatening, "Tell the events exactly. Otherwise, your life cannot be there even for a moment. Tell me quickly."
So there he is, sword in hand, about ready to cut her head off. So tell me what's going on. Let's see what happens. Next verse.
Saivam nishamya tadvakyam Gita pranapapir pi aparipasa Jagau yathavata tatta sarvam chiradvritam samasthitam pradarsha yacha api tasmai tamrityena susangatam. She, having heard his words thus, and frightened on account of her desire for preserving her life, described exactly all those events spread over a long time. She also showed him the princess closely united with the servant at their usual place.
So she takes the prince, goes down to the servants' quarters. And there in the corner is the lovely princess flat on her back with this bad boy just going at it. Next one.
Kvachid bhumau kate bhrityam krishnam pingalalochanam pranshum malina sarvangam rukshavaktram jugupsitam sama samashlisya pratisharantam sarvangai pramabhavatah mridubal मृदुबाहुलतावत् क्रीवस्य वदने स्वकं निवेश्य वक्त्रकमलं पद्भ्यां लिश्य गाढतः तस्योरुयुग्यमं तस्य संसक्त गुरुसुस्तनीं वासन्ति कामिव लतां वृता कुसुमकौरकैः रोहिणीं राहुणोपेताम् इवापश्य नृपात्मजः. The prince saw the tall, dark, and red-eyed servant who was disgusting, dirty in his entire body, and having a rough face, somewhere on a straw mat on the ground, embracing the princess, who was tired after enjoyment with all his body and with love. The prince saw his wife, who was like the vernal creeper covered by flower buds, and the star Rohini eclipsed by the demon Rahu, with her lotus like mouth fixed on the mouth of the servant, whose neck was surrounded by her soft and creeper like arms, clasping tightly by her feet the pair of his thighs and her large breasts clinging to his hands.
Well, it's graphic enough. There he is, and there she is. And at least they're having fun. So he's horrified that she's doing it with this bad boy who, just a servant, but seems to have something that she likes that he lacks. We'll leave it at that. Going on.
Evam vidha samalokya nritraya pagatasmritim momuhya manashchasyantam shanam paschadritim bhajam yatpraha rajatanaya tanmatta shruyatam nanu. Having seen her, who was devoid of memory due to sleep, in such a manner and being disturbed in mind very much for a moment and acquiring courage thereafter, what the prince said, let that be heard from me.
All right, we'll stop there and finish the conclusion of the story in 2 weeks. Next Thursday is Thanksgiving. We will not have class next week. So you're just going to have to tune in 2 weeks, same bat time, same bat channel, to get the conclusion to the story of the hunky prince, the beautiful princess, caught up and all sorts of amorous misdeeds. Any questions? We're actually illustrating some very interesting points. The first of which is Avarana Shakti. Avarana Shakti or Avritti is veiling power, meaning I do not see what is really there. It's said in a humorous story. He does not see what's really there. Then we have the Vikshepa Shakti. He superimposes his beautiful beloved wife onto the servant. And that's what we do. We do not see the world as it really is, Avarana Shakti. And we project our own self-nature, Ananda, onto the world of name and form, and then yearn for it. We have about 5 minutes or so. No questions, no comments. All right, let's sit in meditation then.